If you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page to gain access to exclusive videos, take part in Q&As, and watch my retrospectives before they go live on YouTube.
There's no need for hate now, or love.
There are people who will fight you, David.
They'll stop you.
In an hour, you won't want them to. Don't be trapped by old concepts, Matthew.
I'd keep seeing these people, all recognizing each other. Something was passing between them all. Some secret. It's a conspiracy.
There can't be a conspiracy.
Matthew, I'm telling you, something's going on here. Something that scares me. Matthew, I've lived in this city all my life. But somehow today I felt everything had changed. People were different. It was like the whole city had changed overnight.
My wife, sick.
What's wrong?
She wrong.
She's not right?
That not my wife.
He isn't my husband. It's someone who looks like him. He's an imposter. That woman's husband's not her husband.
Same damn story this week from 6 patients. People are changing. They're becoming less human. It's happening all around us. We jump into a very bizarre conclusion that this man you live with has been replaced by somebody else.
People are being duplicated. And once it's happened to you, you're part of this thing.
I would like to report 4 bodies in my backyard.
They grow out of those pods.
Wait right there, Mr. Bennell.
How do you know my name?
Hang up, Matthew.
I didn't tell you my name.
Hang up.
I didn't tell him my name. Nancy, they've got this building surrounded. How did you get in here?
I've been wandering among them for hours. They can be fooled.
How?
Don't show any emotions. Hide your feelings.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers hit US cinema screens in late December of 1978 and arrived in the UK in March the following year. Produced on a low budget of just under $4 million, it would end up grossing nearly $25 million in the USA alone, making it a box office success. Based on the original 1955 novel The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, this would be the second attempt at adapting the book to the big screen, with many seeing it as a remake of the 1956 classic directed by Don Siegel. Reviews at the time were very positive, but some questioned why remake a classic, with remakes happening so often the past decade, and many fans of film being upset with the notion of another reboot, myself included. Fans were also displeased way back in the 70s, with Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel showing some disdain for the idea of a remake. Come 1982, fans were disgruntled with the notion of John Carpenter remaking The Thing. Though that film performed badly at the time, it is now regarded as a masterpiece. Jack Finney's novel would get remade 2 more times in 1993 and 2007, which I'll discuss later in the video. Since the release of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the film is often regarded as one of the finest remakes alongside John Carpenter's The Thing and David Cronenberg's The Fly. Director Philip Kaufman had been toying with the idea of doing another adaptation of Jack Finney's classic novel, despite having never read the book at the time, but he adored science fiction and was a big fan of the 1956 film. It was considered a favourite amongst sci-fi fans for its effective use of paranoia, and it appeared to many to be commenting on the invasion of communism during this period. The director Don Siegel would later say he had not intended for there to be a political angle. His goal was to make an entertaining movie, but it was ripe for analysis and kept people coming back to discover its underlying themes. Like the book, it plays on fears we all have of others turning secretly behind our backs to get us. Philip did get the chance to speak with the director and the star of the 50s film, Kevin McCarthy, while he was visiting MGM. Kaufman asked what they would like to see if it was remade. Don and Kevin both wanted to see more humour and a darker ending. The original had those two elements cut from the 50s film, as the studio felt humour didn't work in a horror movie and the dark ending would have upset audiences. Kaufman enlisted writer Walter Richter, who would later go on to direct Buckaroo Banzai and pen the script to Big Trouble in Little China. Richter knew the original film well, but hadn't read the book like Kaufman. The initial drafts of the script was again to focus on a small town, but after some location scouting, Kaufman felt in order to do something different, they needed to change the location, and settled on San Francisco, which was Kaufman's favourite city. There was efforts on behalf of Richter and Kaufman not to make the script too political, as they felt it would date the movie and wanted to keep things more general. Their direction was the fear of conformity, losing your own path. A big city is where you can lose your individuality, and San Francisco was at the time, and I suppose still is today, a very liberal, forward-thinking city, and that notion of conformity became the biggest fear and threat of this alien invasion. There is an element of narcissism reflecting the me generation of youngsters at the time, people interested in self-realisation and self-fulfillment over social responsibility. The character of David Kibner would be the perfect reflection of what was going on. Kaufman didn't see his version as a remake, more of a reimagining of the 50s film. He wanted it to be scary but also funny and a tragic love story, with less focus on science fiction and more on the human aspect. For the casting, we see Donald Sutherland as Matthew, who works as a health inspector. Originally he was going to be a musician, a jazz player, but was changed during the rewrites. Donald was working on Animal House at the same time, so he was jumping between productions. Brooke Adams would later comment he seemed distant to some of the crew, somewhat aloof, but Donald said he had a great time making the movie. Sutherland still gets work steadily to this day, but at the time he was a big name in Hollywood, starring in a number of box office hits such as MASH and Don't Look Now. Brooke Adams plays Elizabeth. She never auditioned for the film, she just chatted with the director and got a call a few weeks later and got the part. Brooke never saw the original film but was excited to take part, but was terrified to do the nude scene as she hadn't been undressed on film before. Brooke has the rare ability to roll her eyes quickly, which she jokingly does to prove she is still normal to Matthew. Leonard Nimoy plays David, a popular psychiatrist. Nimoy was still a superstar at the time. He constantly had people approaching him on set to talk about Star Trek, but remained totally cool. He was very patient with his fans, impressing his fellow cast members. Many felt he was cast to appeal to the fans of the sci-fi genre. Kaufman said the casting of Nimoy was that he had been typecast, and this role was to help him break out of that. Nimoy decided to wear this glove to show that his character suffered from carpal tunnel syndrome. Jeff Goldblum plays Jack, a struggling poet who is close friends with Matthew but can't stand Dr. Kibner. This was an early role for Jeff, and Philip Kaufman would later cast him in The Right Stuff. The other cast members found Jeff's style of acting strange and amusing. Jeff's career would really take off in the remake of The Fly in 1986, and he would become a household name for his role in Jurassic Park. Veronica Cartwright plays Nancy, Jack's wife. She runs a spa and is the first of the group to take the invasion seriously, and she figures out a way to fool them by showing no emotions. Veronica was a star from a young age in Hitchcock's The Birds. The following year, appearing in Alien, Veronica would return for a supporting role in the fourth remake of Body Snatchers in The Invasion in 2007. Art Hingle plays Jeffrey, Elizabeth's boyfriend, who we see become the first victim of the aliens. Art loved sci-fi. He felt the original 50s movie was scary as a kid. He was very excited to star in this remake, and this would be his first big feature film. Art starred in a number of horrors very close together, with Black Christmas, Body Snatchers and The Brood. We also have a number of cameos, including the star of the original 50s movie, Kevin McCarthy. Kevin warns Matthew and Elizabeth that they are coming and they are here, reciting his lines from the original. Some fans like to say that his character has been running since the original film, so this could be a sequel and not a straight-up remake. Don Siegel, the director of the 50s classic, appears as a taxi driver. He is played to be ambiguous, so you don't know if he has been snatched, but he does refer to Matthew and Elizabeth as Type H, which could imply H for human. And finally we have Robert Duvall as the priest on a swing. Philip Kaufman says in his commentary to the film that Duvall is the first to be snatched in San Francisco. The shoot began in the middle of February 1978, and they wrapped 2 months later at the end of April. Cinematographer Michael Chapman worked with Kaufman to try and capture the film noir feel of the original in colour. reviewing some classics of that genre before production, focusing on shadows, shooting through glass, people in only half light, and unusual angles. One sequence, Chapman really demonstrated his skills as a cameraman when Donald's character is being grilled by the police for breaking into Jeffrey's house. They thought this would take forever to do, as it was a small room and would require a number of days to get the different angles and enough coverage, but Chapman just did it handheld and stayed in the middle of the room as he moved around getting the coverage he needed. It was really effective and saved the production loads of money and time. The film only had a small number of sets created, with the majority of the film making use of real locations. The bathhouse and the warehouse where the Snatchers created their pods were the only locations they would change to fit the script. As many of the sequences took place at night, the cast and crew grew tired of the long night shoots, and in particular the people living down the street of some of the locations. Donald did a lot of his own stunts, and in the scene where he escapes from the warehouse, one of the extras didn't listen to their directions and got caught in an explosion of fire, and he unfortunately burnt his hands due to the error. Sound editor Ben Burt, who had helped create many of the signature sounds for Star Wars the year before, also added to the film's ambience, highlighting sounds such as the grinding noise of garbage trucks, pigs shrieking for when the aliens cry out, and he recorded womb-like sounds for the pods. Ben's wife was pregnant at the time, so he took his tape recorder to the doctors to capture the sound. It was quite new to be able to listen to the child developing in the womb then. He also replicated the sound of heartbeats on a synthesizer. To add to these new sound effects, he recorded breathing effects from 3 different sources. He did some strange breathing techniques, slowing it down, recording some through scuba gear like for Darth Vader, and also recorded a hand bicycle pump. The film's final sound mix impressed Dolby. Films encoded with Dolby Stereo were the best way to experience movies in a theatre, with the likes of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Apocalypse Now and Star Wars blowing people away with this new surround sound technology. Each new film found new ways to make use of separate channels of sound, and Body Snatchers became one of Dolby's favourite movies to demonstrate the use of their new system. Kaufman kept the ending a secret from the cast and even the studio, who kept pressuring him to find out what happens. When it came to the shoot, Philip told Donald how it would end, and not in a happy way like the 50s original. The director said Donald embraced it. The next day when we went to shoot it, I don't remember that we even told Veronica until Donald turned and did that shriek. The studio executives didn't find out till the film was screened for them at George Lucas's house, but they loved it. Philip Kaufman took a chance and it paid off. For the film's story, a race of gelatinous spores have abandoned their dying planet. They travel across the galaxy and find a new home on Earth, landing in San Francisco. They infiltrate the ecosystem, latching onto plant life and taking the form of small pods, which blossom into flowers. Elizabeth, a lab scientist at the health department, brings one of the flowers home, leaving the flower on the bedside table next to her boyfriend Jeffrey. She awakens the next morning to discover he is now behaving cold and distant. Elizabeth's colleague Matthew advises her to visit his psychiatrist friend David Kibner, who is holding a book signing party. As Elizabeth and Matthew drive to the bookstore, a hysterical man warns them of danger and shouts, "They are coming, you'll be next," before being chased away by a mob of people, then is hit by a car. The mob watch his death without any emotion. At the bookstore, Elizabeth hears another complaining of loved ones having changed. Kibner thinks Elizabeth is simply using the belief that Jeffrey is behaving differently as an excuse to end their relationship. Across town, Matthew's friend Jack calls him to investigate a bizarre body found in his wife Nancy's mud baths. It is covered in fibres and appears to resemble Jack. Sensing something terrible in these odd occurrences, Matthew goes to warn Elizabeth. Getting no answer from her phone, he breaks into her house, finding Elizabeth in a deep sleep, but also discovers a semi-formed duplicate of her in the bedroom and has to rescue her before it's too late. With the film's low budget, a lot of the visual effects would be done in camera to save money and avoid the costly and time-consuming process of optical effects. They did come to rely on some opticals, but the FX team focused on miniatures, matte paintings, makeup, prosthetics, and camera tricks such as reverse photography to bring these aliens to life. The alien world was a forced perspective miniature created on plywood with added volcanic rock. The spores were created with some slime purchased from an art store for $12. Once put in water, it became something more organic. The plant life was all latex, and when they shot the flowers blossoming, it was done in reverse, far easier to pull the leaves in instead of pushing them out. Early on in Body Snatchers, there's a setup with a local banjo player and his dog. Later, when the man and dog are being snatched, their pods and bodies become fused. The production fabricated a mask of the banjo's face to put on the dog, and put something on the lips of the mask so that the dog's tongue would lick it. This was shocking to audiences at the time, and it works really well considering their limitations. The most impressive effect in the movie is the transformation of the plants into human beings. They had performers in different phases of the transformation. It's really detailed in the early stages of their growth, and becomes body horror once Matthew wakes up and destroys them. For its low budget, the effects are very impressive and for the most part stand up well today, thanks largely due to their efforts to do these effects for real and in camera. The score was composed by Denny Zeitlin, and this would be the only score he provided to a feature film. Denny was an established jazz musician who also worked as a psychiatrist. He was friends with the director Philip Kaufman and received a phone call out of the blue offering him the job. Denny had no experience scoring films, but loved film music, with composer Bernard Herrmann being one of his favourites, but thinking he would never get another chance to write music for a Hollywood feature, he jumped at the chance. Zeitlin chose not to watch the original 50s film to avoid being influenced, but the director had some ideas and gave him temp cues to get inspired. The film had a low budget, but Denny felt he had a lot of freedom to use what he wanted, with no restrictions, making use of a full orchestra and even synthesizers. The director wanted electronic music, but also wanted it to sound organic, and the results made for some eerie sounds. The process of writing music for film was very complex and difficult for Denny, as it was such a departure from what he had done before. He ended up working for nearly 20 hours a day, getting little sleep, but he loved hearing the score come to life on the soundstage. Following Body Snatchers, he got some offers again to compose for film, but bowed out, as it was the best offer he got at the time and didn't think he could do it again. The soundtrack was issued on LP and cassette in 1979, containing 12 tracks of music, and was reissued on CD in 2003, with some additional tracks containing audio interviews. The score to the film does work extremely well, and creates an uneasy atmosphere with the help of the synthesizers, especially on the tracks titled The Discovery and Infiltration. Even though Denny said he avoided the original 50s movie, there are some musical cues that do sound very familiar to that style of music from that decade, in particular with the opening title march and the track titled Rescue. The score was very clever with it mimicking sound effects, so you are unsure of what you're hearing is a sound effect or part of the score. You could say it's very experimental, but a number of the tracks don't lend themselves to easy listening. But for Denny's first and only score, it's an incredible achievement. Before we get to my review on the film, let's discuss the two other remakes. In 1993, Warner Bros. Financed a new retelling of the classic story just called Body Snatchers. The plot is centered around a military base in Alabama, where people are being replaced with what you come to expect, imitations grown from plant-like pods. It received generally positive reviews from critics, with Roger Ebert awarding it 4 stars out of 4, considering it superior to the other adaptations, but some others said it was a soulless replica of the 1956 and 1978 versions. Sadly, it was pushed out with little fanfare from Warner Bros., who released it in a small number of theatres. It would find its audience once it came to VHS, Laserdisc and eventually TV. The 1993 film had some nice moments. It has a great score, and the opening titles seem to have been inspired by the Superman opening credits. But its decision to focus on a military base makes everything feel small in scale. It ends up feeling like a TV movie, which is probably why Warner Bros. Held back from giving it a big theatrical release. These snatched people appear smarter than the 78 film though, as they try to trick you into revealing your true identity by provoking an emotional response. Overall, it's an underwhelming film with a few nice ideas, but it didn't really do much to offer something new. Warner Bros. Attempted it again over a decade later with The Invasion, starring Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. Dropping the Body Snatchers name, I suppose the next remake will just be called The. This was released in the summer of 2007 and was a box office failure, with critics calling it a soulless rehash feeling low rent. The film had production problems, with the director being replaced and rewrites at the studio's request to spice up the action. The plot follows a psychiatrist played by Kidman in Washington DC, who finds those around her turning into emotionless beings shortly after a major space shuttle crash. Instead of pods, the alien is spread like a virus, with the snatched individuals puking over you or into a drink. Once turned, they become emotionless like the other films, but appear more aggressive. There is no pointing and screaming, but those long stares with their mouths opening quickly like they are ready to bite you. I did chuckle that Kidman's kid wears a Superman costume and is called Oliver. It's me as a kid. It's not a bad film, but very forgettable. It does make efforts to do something different with the aliens, but we just end up with a lot of dull back and forth conversations, with them trying to figure out a vaccine, and it ends with a generic car chase. They try to spice it up, covering it from every angle, and cutting every second, making for confusing end results. This is the only one that actually has an ending where we see what happens in the long run, and in this everyone goes back to normal, unlike the others. Even though the 90s film and the 2007 versions aren't as good as the other two, they still retain the original idea of Jack Finney's novel, and still have some good nuggets in them that make them perfectly watchable, but they pale in comparison to the classics. Another good example of being inspired by Body Snatchers is Robert Rodriguez's The Faculty, which honestly has a lot more fun with the premise. I saw Invasion of the Body Snatchers in my early teens. Having a TV in your bedroom, you had the opportunity to stay up and watch movies, often horror films late at night, and Body Snatchers was one of them. I'd never seen the 50s version and hadn't heard much about the 70s film. I found this movie to be totally gripping from start to end, and was completely freaked out by how it ends, with Donald Sutherland's character pointing and screaming at Veronica Cartwright. Once the credits roll, there is no music, so you can reflect on what just happened, giving this dark finale strike the impact it needed. Then there was this massive gap. When I didn't watch it for years, I picked up the 90s remake on Laserdisc and wasn't too impressed with that, and then when Arrow issued it on Blu-ray, I had to grab it. Revisiting it at an older age, it still worked, and I noticed a lot more things going on in the film. The beauty of this version of Body Snatchers is that straight away there is stuff happening in the background. It lays down the paranoia and keeps you wondering who has been snatched by these aliens. As soon as we hit Earth, you see the priest acting suspect after Elizabeth takes the flower. You see a woman with a bunch of kids telling them to pick the flowers. Has she been taken? You see a guy in a suit running from something as Elizabeth walks to work, and you can hear a subtle scream on a sound mix. On my first viewing, these were things I missed, and the fun of this film is discovering more clues of people just staring or looking strangely into the camera. You don't know for certain, but it helps in building up the sense that the human characters are getting surrounded quickly before you even know what the problem is, and eventually they are outnumbered. Kaufman does the smart thing of not drawing attention to it. He doesn't point at anything particular, but just lets it play out to keep you second guessing. The Invasion from 2007 tries to mimic this to some extent, but it's not as subtle and so doesn't have the same effect. It also becomes fun to guess who has already been snatched by these aliens. Dr. Kibner was always one character where me and my friends tried to figure out what moment he is copied. I think once he arrives at the bathhouse, this is the new version of him, as he disposes of Jack's double. But it does make you doubt that sometimes, because he's not totally emotionless and cold, he acts normal, so it's a clever ploy to shift the focus. He also could have been snatched earlier at the book signing party. Elizabeth looks around and sees loads of people just staring at Kibner as he helps a woman who believes her husband has changed. It's like they are ready to pounce with their goal to snatch those of influence. Very quickly into the movie, it appears the aliens have already created an infrastructure. The garbage men have already been taken even before Jeffrey, as he gets rid of the remains of his human counterpart. So it's unclear how quickly these alien parasites have spread throughout the city. Matthew's attempts to get help from those in power cause endless delays, with him getting no definite answer and being warned not to cause a panic, as what he is worried about sounds completely ludicrous to anyone who hasn't experienced what he has. You do get a sense that once you are snatched, you become part of this hive mind, as we see them grouped together but not speaking. You get a great sense that they are all connected. As we discover, you can easily fool them by reining in your emotions, which Nancy figured out quickly. But we do see Matthew and Elizabeth attempt to do something similar before they bump into Nancy and soon get discovered. Showing no emotions can only go so far, it seems, as with this hive mind idea, they seem to get a sense of not being connected to them and soon start screaming out once they figured out who's still human. When Matthew and Elizabeth get a taxi cab and the driver refers to them as Type H, soon after he questions them, they soon realise leaving the city is impossible. It's funny that Matthew does walk around the seedy part of San Francisco. Seemingly the aliens aren't too interested in these folk. I would say hiding in a porn theatre would be a safe hiding place. The idea of the alien starting out as a flower and then growing quickly into a giant pod that in itself would expand into a larger flower to then produce a replica human is a little mixed up. They say they get you once you sleep, but that can only happen if there's a pod near you, right? so even if you drift off, you should be safe if you are not near a pod. In the case of Elizabeth, we see her double being made twice before she is taken to safety, but eventually turns once she falls asleep, even though there's no pod in sight. Perhaps the previous attempts at a replication suddenly awaken. The film does suggest the positives of becoming part of this new life form. No more anxiety and fear, no more wars, everyone working together, which on some level could seem like the perfect world, but you lose what makes you special, your humanity. Your personality is gone, you no longer have any emotions and feelings. Love is wiped out in favour of this collective for the greater good and to serve one purpose. This was the core fear of Jack Finney's book, and through all the remakes, this is the biggest threat to the humans. That idea is still a strong and an effective way to push the horror and fears of an alien invasion. The first act of Body Snatchers is definitely its strongest for me. I always love the build up to the eventual realisation that the enemy is closing in. It's like disaster movies. I love the first act, spotting the clues and seeing changes happen without people really noticing until the massive explosion or incident that starts this rollercoaster ride of panicking and escaping. With the third act, the film becomes a chase movie. It could have fallen into the trap of just watching them run from point A to point B, but it keeps you engaged because of the love story. Matthew and Elizabeth clearly have a lot of affection for each other. There is chemistry from the offset. Early on they are flirting and are totally comfortable with one another. Certainly they have more in common than Elizabeth and Jeffrey. When they are finally cornered by Kibner and Jack and given a sedative, fearing it's the end, Matthew and Elizabeth declare their love for one another. It's a powerful moment and shows what makes humans so special as they fade away. Once they escape and are running out of energy, Elizabeth finally changes and Matthew holds her body in his arms, but her remains just crumble away. It's a gut punch and shows their love literally falling apart. Donald's performance here is heartbreaking, as he is about to cry out in horror and then suddenly sees the new Elizabeth as she tries to persuade him to give in. For a film that is over 40 years old, it still remains as effective as ever, largely thanks to the direction and performances. It doesn't rely on heavy optical effects, with most of it done within camera, but it provides a good slice of science fiction. Michael Chapman's photography is superb, everything looks fantastic, the shadows of the characters on the run are perfectly executed, seeing people in half light really nails the film noir style. The sense of movement with the camera keeps up the notion of the enemy closing in, and how the editing becomes quicker as it really ramps up the fear that these characters are now outnumbered and have little time left until they are caught or fall asleep and lose who they are forever. It doesn't get bogged down in politics, which was a smart move from director Kaufman and writer Richter, keeping the film fresh, and the only thing that seems dated is their clothes and hair. It's very 70s. Out of all the Body Snatcher films, I really like the 50s version, but this 70s film has to be my favourite. It could be a generational thing, but the Philip Kaufman film is the one that really made the strongest impression. It's one of the best remakes and one of the best science fiction horrors. It plays on our deepest fears and does it with such skill and finesse.
There's nothing to be afraid of. They were right. It's painless. It's good. Sleep. Matthew!